people today. But I know for a fact that getting too close to the U.S. government really does, perceived or actual, really does tarnish the potential credibility of the message. And I thought that came out in the last presentation as well. And Tony and I have gone over this, a number of times. But it's required from our State Department colleagues who engage online. And we had, I think it was exactly a year ago, somebody from the State Department Office of Counterterrorism who does this online stuff. And he told us that they had to attribute it to the U.S. government by law. And it was kind of ruining the whole thing. He was coming up with a terrific presentation, and at the end of which it said, brought to you by the U.S. government. And people automatically, perceive it as being colored and prejudiced. I don't know how we get around it, but it's something that's out there. And I know for a fact from my experience overseas, some initial distrust of U.S. government propaganda. And, we need it, and we do have to do it in a very sophisticated kind of way. So that would be my view, and I think it comes out in many other ways of the discussions that we've seen here over the past day. So Mubin and I are going to sort of talk a while, and Mubin was at our conference in New York and did a terrific job, and I think became even more well-known than he was before through our efforts. He has been there and he has done that. And I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about his background. He has that kind of credibility that's really important. And I think for our young ladies and those who have talked about it before, it's clear how much credibility counts. And so when we can talk about the counter-narrative and reformed jihadis and terrorists who have seen the light, what Mubin represents, I think, is even more significant, even more important. So, Mubin, why don't you talk a little bit about your engagement with the jihadists, can I use that word, in that context? And then we'll open it up for discussion and talk a little bit more. And please, all of you who have been here today, we'd like to know your views as well and where we go from here. So, Mubin, go ahead.
All right. First of all, really thank you, Stan, for having me again, and all of you for coming. Some of you I've met before. I've seen you at the New York conference, and happy to meet the rest of you today. And fantastic presentations today, by the way, really. I'm not just saying that. I do have a huge cynical streak, especially as I've been watching social media space and seeing all the stuff that's been happening and institutions standing up, whatnot. I'm happy to see these efforts. I mean that because I was getting so frustrated that nothing's being done. Who's going to do it? Who can do it? Who should be doing it? And it's good to see that civil society is doing it. And I think, and this will be really what I'm going to lean towards, is that it's not going to be the job of government to do. Not going to be the job of government to do. I should say with the cat picture on Think Again, Turn Away. So one of the reasons why that showed up was if you were monitoring a lot of these ISIS social media accounts, foreign fighters, they posted pictures of them with cats. They jumped on the whole cat picture phenomenon. And I have a picture on my phone, and it's a bunch of extremists, ISIS guys sitting there with a laptop watching some videos. And there's a cat laying on the back of the couch, and the caption reads, "Even the cats are radicalized." So I think that's what the State Department was trying to do with that. But I think you'll discover that there are more followers of cat profiles than the State Department's counter-extremism page. So what I'm going to do is I want to. So just quickly on my background, I mean, there's my bios in the guide there. As I was saying, in 2012, so let me just give you a quick chronology, right? My time, I went through a period of radicalization. In 1995 is when I went to India and Pakistan. In Pakistan, I was sent to a city called Quetta, and Unbeknownst to me at the time, Quetta was the stronghold of the Taliban. And as I was walking about the area, I saw these bearded guys with robes and turbans. I thought, oh, religious scholars. So as I came close to them, you know, they had rocket-propelled grenades, machine gun, ammunition. So young kid, identity issues, you know, I saw them as heroes. And, you know, I became completely enamored by them. And that exact sort of hero deficit in the Muslim world, I think there's a hero deficit. And that idea of becoming enamored with, you know, the romanticization of these soldiers of God, you know, I bought into that. And this is exactly what you're seeing today. It's a new iteration of that, but it's the same thing. So I come back from 95, come back to Canada, join the extremist milieu, recruiting other people, you know, giving the jihadi da'wah, as it was called. And 9/11 happened. And, you know, I know everyone remembers where they were that day, right? That's our moment in time. And I'll be honest, when I was driving to work and I heard on the radio that a plane hit the building, the first words out of my mouth was, Allahu Akbar, God is great. I was somewhat happy. And then as I drove to the workplace that I was at, you know, there's an office building, and as you drive up, you see the office building, and I thought, you know, what if a plane flew into this building right now, right? I'm down with the cause, I'm in, but it's not like I'm gonna get a call saying, hey, get out. Then as I came up, I heard somebody else come and say, hey, a plane has hit the World Trade Center. And I said, no, I already said that. And she said, no, a second plane has hit. Then I thought, oh man, please don't let it be Muslims, right? That's like the, yeah, didn't work out. But that day, as the day went on, I went home for lunch, and my wife was watching TV, and she's like, oh, you know, intently watching, and she's like, honey, you know, people are calling the house. Like, are you sure you didn't have anything to do with this, right? My Muslim friends, the good Muslim friends, are calling me saying, Mubin, this is not our religion. This is not what we're about. My non-Muslim friends are calling me saying, Mubin, is this your religion? Is this what you're about? Because they knew me before I was a regular kid with them. And then I came back and I got a beard, I have a robe, I'm wearing a turban now. And as the day went on, I was assailed from all different sides, forcing me to reevaluate my commitment to the cause. And later on that day, I went to see the bad Muslim friends, and you know, they were very happy. You know, they were celebrating and they were saying, you know, good. But one of my friends, standing right beside me, said, he said, you know, yeah, but he goes, yeah, but those are innocent people. Like, what do they have to do with our fight? And there was an awkward silence for a moment, and then, you know, one of them says, well, they're kuffar anyway, so you can kill them. They're non-believers, so you can kill them anyway. Yeah, and the rest. But that day changed my life. For a lot of people, it sent them into various paths, and for me, it sent me on a different path, away from extremism. Went to Syria, I spent 2 years studying Arabic and Islamic studies, realized the completely faulty interpretations that we used to use, that ISIS uses today, and came back, did undercover work with the intelligence service, like nice, solid infiltration operations. 4 years of court. 2010, I was out. So I kind of rebranded myself. I had done a master's degree, and I was, you know, I could see this domestic radicalization. The topic was growing. The theme was more pervasive. And then 2012, I got on Twitter. The Syrian war started. I was on Twitter. And then this is when the whole ISIS foreign fighter thing began. So just take a snapshot of the chronology for a second. 2013, I think it was April 2013, ISIS comes in from Iraq into Syria. A year and a bit later, in June 2014, they declare their caliphate. Okay? So here we are, a year and a bit after that. So it's actually been a very short time, really, when you look at, if you're looking at conflicts, wars that are being fought, it's a very short time. And so look at what's happened in that time. Now, I think personally that the foreign fighter phenomenon has peaked. I think that because of security efforts at home, and finally, I mean, the Turkish government is doing something, or have been doing something. They deported a lot of people, about 1,500 people were sent back. Bless you. And Of course, passports being taken away, and we'll get into this. Some of the topics I think I want to pull out from you is, what should be done with returning foreign fighters? That's just one topic, and I'll just, quickly say that I have two minds with this. One's the sympathetic mind of, some of them are really young. They were duped, because of their own stupidity. They're kids. I remember how I was at that age. Some of them were duped. Some of them are victims. They are. But on the other hand, some people said that, if you threaten them with arrest, they might not come back. The problem with that is what? So I have two minds of this. I think we can discuss that. But just to finish this really long intro, just to take that snapshot of those years and to see what's transpired in that time. So even when we're talking about developing strategies, social media strategies, changing hearts and minds, are you going to do that in a year? A year and a bit? 2 years? How long is that going to take? So let us also situate ourselves in the reality of time and how time works and how people's attitudes change, the kinds of narratives that we think will stick, won't work, some are trial and error. Like the State Department. I know the people who are doing, that, and they came at a time when there was nobody doing any counter messaging, zero, and at least they did something, right? And I know they've kind of been dwarfed by all these other things that have been set up, and that's great. I think they're happy with that because they never intended to be, they're going to change people or convince people to, put down their arms or not be radicalized or whatever. And it's a very good point. At the end of it, you put out the message, and it's like, brought to you by the great Satan. And it's the American government's stamp on it is not going to do it. I think especially for a lot of you who are military people, and I've spoken with other military types who ask, what's the role of the military in this? The military is not going to do social media engagement. That's not part of your mandate. Now, there's a profile for PSYOPs, psychological operations, but that's, again, in a very limited context, right? You can't do PSYOPs on Twitter. You could, but couldn't get away with it, I think. So anyways, I think we should just take a look at what's happened in that time. We can talk about all those things, not just what do we do about returning foreign fighters, but the messaging. We're talking about, their violent, sadistic messaging. We can't do the same thing back, can we? Or in a lot of cases, that violence doesn't repel people, it attracts them. We live in like a society that glorifies violence, from beginning to end, morning to evening. It glorifies violence. In fact, one of the biggest challenges, I think, to countering ISIS social media is the mainstream media, who retweets all this stuff and who keeps, putting this stuff out. Latest ISIS video, ISIS did this, ISIS did that. And it's like, so how are you going to fight against the mainstream media that's like, for viewership, and each one is trying to outdo the other one, and how are you going to counter that? So I think these are just some of the questions that I want you to kind of think about, and bring some questions. Yes, sir.
The returning foreign fighters piece, I'm kind of torn like you are with the younger and then the older. My question to you is, okay, you returned. Why'd you change? How did you change? Did the government change you? Or did you change you? And is that how we get after the future of foreign fighters returning?
So I look at myself as an exception to the rule. I understand everyone has an individualized journey. Radicalization is an individualized journey. For me, it was a number of issues that I saw and the way that they impacted me. So, while I was in Syria, I was actually called Taliban more in Syria than in the West, because in Indo-Pak, dressing like that, that's Taliban. If it's an Arab dressing like that, that's Al-Qaeda, right? So one was that. The Syrian schools refused to hire me to teach English because of the way I dressed. And so who hired me? The American school, saying, well, we don't discriminate. That's our laws. And you have a Western accent, and we need you to teach Arabic kids, I was just like, it really impacted me. A third thing, for example, was the mosques were closed between prayers. So you could only go in, do your prayer, and get out. And I couldn't fathom this. I was like, why, how did this happen? Like, and you know, the various political groups conspired against the government, and so the government said you can't congregate in the mosques. And I'm thinking back, I left Canada with the idea that, you know, kuffar country, infidel state, you know, they're at war with us, blah, blah, blah. And I go there, and it's like, what the hell? So those were things that stood out for me. And I think the most important aspect was the religious training. So this is why there's a lot of attention being put on the religious side of things. So for me, it was the learning the proper interpretations of those verses, the rules of interpretation. So why you don't just look at one verse and then take that verse. You have to look, well, are there other verses similar to that? It's hermeneutics. It's just like biblical hermeneutics, actually. It's the same concept. If this one thing has been said here, where, you know, what's the other corresponding verse? Or if this word is used here, where else is that word used? So for me, that's what did it for me. I just want to make a point on the whole topic of Islam in all of this. I don't want it to be an elephant in the room. I like to use the term TICs, T-I-Cs, terrorists in Islamic costume. Islamic is used properly as an adjective. Costume is used properly because what they're doing is they're putting on the garb of religiosity as a costume. You know, they're not quoting the, I think it was Peter who said, look, there's enough in the Quran and Hadith for them to cherry pick, and he's right. It's not, they're not quoting the Bhagavad Gita or any other text. They are manipulating the verses of the Quran. And just in defense of the Combating Terrorism Center, they put out a good piece, how extremists misquote the Quran, right? So one is, we need the terms. We need to use the correct terms. I hate the term Islamic State. Don't call them Islamic State. We're giving them the legitimacy that we're trying to then take away from them. Understand? I like using ISIS because ISIS is a pagan goddess, right? And even the term Daesh has been used. Daesh is used as a pejorative term, but Daesh is just the Arabic acronym Dal, Alif, Ain, and Sheen, which is Dawla Islamiyya fil Iraq wa Sham. That's Daesh. So you're actually saying Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, which is ISIS, but in an Arabic acronym. So we're struggling with some terms. I think one is to get the terms right. Number two, how you approach the religion of Islam in all of this. Now, I always say this openly. I don't care if you don't like Islam as a religion or Muslims. It's okay. But if you're tasked with a mission, and that mission is to deal with this topic, you should probably use phrases, terms, concepts, which will help you achieve your mission objective. Forget about your personal views. I mean, I have personal views on all sorts of things that I just don't verbalize, right? Because I know that it'll impact, it might offend the people that I'm with. So I think one way is not saying that you preach Islam. Don't do that. I mean, be religious if you are the religious types. I think one very important approach to take in this is a pro-religious angle for Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, whoever, whatever. You know, this tolerance, interfaith, coexistence message is far more powerful. So I think, just to bring it back to my personal experience, that's what did it for me. With returning foreign fighters, it's going to be very, very complicated. There are so many layers to this. Can I just go into that? All right. It is very complicated, many, many layers. Just because a foreign fighter is disillusioned doesn't mean he's de-radicalized. It's very important to know that. The guy could come back, you know, all messed up, PTSD. I mean, we failed to treat our veterans properly. Think of a minority community, and within that minority community, you have these fringe elements. Who's gonna treat them? And if you don't, you could do all the counter messaging in the world. If the physical brain is affected by their experience of what's happened to them, your messaging is not even going to go in the ear, right? So we have to first categorize those people who have returned. Who are they? Age is going to matter. The younger they are, the more, I think, salvageable they are. The older they are, that's going to be that's going to be difficult. Because by then, when you're an adult, if you're 26, 27 years old, and you've been in that, you know, mindset for so long. Now, of course, the flip side to that is maybe they tried it out and it didn't work for them, and they're going to leave like I did. I mean, I was on that for almost 15 years, right? 95 to, well, not 15 years. But like the way that I dress, I did for almost 15 years. But like I was in that mindset for a long time, right? I was an adult at that time. So that's another thing to look at. You know, so various governments have different approaches, different strategies. You know, one is we can't render them stateless. This is apparently a law that we have to follow. So, okay, you can't do that. All right, so with dual citizenship, so now one approach has been, all right, well, if they have dual citizenship, take away one citizenship. Okay, it might work. But what if somebody wanted to renounce their citizenship? So I was talking to a kid from Jordan who wants to work with the Canadians, all right? But the Jordanian government, they have their eye on him, okay? Now, in order for you to renounce your Jordanian citizenship, it will cost you about $4,000 that he doesn't have. And who knows what kind of repercussions may come on his family who are still in Jordan, right? So now there's an issue with the dual citizenship thing, all right? What else can be done with them? Okay, prosecution. Okay, well, one thing that a lot of Western governments are having problems with, if you don't have eyewitness evidence of what they did, how are you going to prosecute them? What evidence of criminal wrongdoing do you have? They cover their faces, they use aliases. How are you going to do that? That's why the overwhelming majority of anti-ISIS prosecutions are all low-hanging fruits, you know, teenage kids who are either trying to go or recruited somebody to go, and that's it. Okay, so if they do come back, if they admit what they did, do you then use that and prosecute them? Maybe. What else can you do with them? Okay, can you put them through a de-radicalization program? And, you know, we've heard this as well. Well, if the guy doesn't want to de-radicalize, you cannot force him into a de-radicalization program. I mean, he may just use the de-rad program to say, yep, I went through it, check my box, and I'm out. And then he gets out, you're all patting your back, you know, yourselves on the back with such a good de-rad program you have, and then one guy goes off. One guy, that's it. You could have, you know, 500 returnees. One guy goes off, it's going to throw everything into disrepute. So I would propose that there, I mean, you know, national security agencies, other agencies, they have found ways to reach out to some of these people. Some of these people have fled ISIS territory. They're either in Turkey or in nearby countries. They will need to be put through, okay, I don't want to say it this way. We should exploit them, and I mean that in the proper way, as much as possible. They will need to go on TV. They will need to go to schools, mosques. You should probably establish some kind of, I don't want to call it an academy, but some kind of center where they will be able to congregate. They're going to need preparation because they're going to have to face extreme hostility from people. Who's going to want to believe them? One of the reasons why I'm able to do what I do is that I don't have blood on my hands. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't blow anything up. If I was standing here telling you that I killed these many, I beheaded people, I raped women, you gonna want people like that as your credible messenger? So it's fraught with difficulties. You know, the one side is let's try to do what we can. They have a counter messaging value, and I was kind of discussing this. I think that's arguable, how much value they actually have. Out of tens of millions of Muslims living in the West, Western Europe and North America, 5,000 have gone to join ISIS. 5,000. That's nothing. And so you're going to get these guys to come back, and you're going to dissuade a few dozen people from going, let's say, and it's a totally arbitrary number. What's the cost benefit here? The risk of bringing them back, I would submit, is far greater than what we can bet. Well, I mean, I'm not saying no completely. I think some will have benefit. Some will have a positive effect, but I don't think we should kind of open the door to all of them to come back. And so I kind of default to my second point of, you know, if they feel that they're going to be prosecuted, they don't want to come back. Do you want them back? I think a lot of them will just not admit it. They will say, I was doing this, I was like, you hear, they make a lot of excuses. These guys are, you gotta understand something, you know, there's the nice side, but then there's like the, understand who you're dealing with, right? Like, I have seen with my own eyes discussions with ISIS people who are saying, we're gonna send people back as de-radicalized guys. I've seen it, I've seen the conversations, I've engaged in the conversations. Or, you know, finding the people who are doing the de-radicalizing and targeting them to send a message to other people, don't get involved in this stuff. I get threats all the time. Like, I actually stopped doing them just because I got fed up with arguing with 15-year-olds on Twitter. But, I mean, I get beheading pictures posted, tagged with me, tagged in it all the time. You know, but
Could you talk a little bit, Mubin, about your return? Why did the Canadian government not do anything when you returned? Is it because they have this great knowledge of human nature or whatever it is? I'm curious. Or was it so long ago? Had you returned 4 or 5 years ago, you know, after the World Trade Center bombing and all that? Why were you not prosecuted by the Canadian government? And I think it's great you were not, because you make a terrific spokesperson. And that's my concern, is we need people like you who have been there and have the credibility. But if we're not going to let them back into our countries, then we run the risk. And some of you were in New York and heard the magnificent presentation by the gentleman from Denmark, which has a superb de-radicalization program. Not everybody gets through it. They make decisions that some people are simply incorrigible forever. But it's really, I thought, a dynamic, really intelligent way of dealing with the returned people. And I remember talking to one ambassador from, I think it was Kosovo, about a year ago. We were talking about this, and he said, radicalization always comes back home. And I thought it was a great line, that sooner or later, these people who become radicalized are going to return home or try to return home. And that's the threat, I think, to all of our countries. But can you just talk a little bit about the reaction of the Canadian government to your return?
yeah, so my activities really, they ranged from 1995 to 2001. And so before 9/11, were we even talking about radicalization? No. Foreign fighters, I mean, what was that? I mean, there was some travel to Afghanistan, of course. There was some discussion, but in, you know, more practitioner circles, academic circles. But I think it was really 9/11 is what changed everything. If it was a post 9/11 environment, I think I would be probably, I don't know where I would be. So one is the time in which it took place. Two, that did I engage in criminal acts? I mean, by inviting people to the jihadi dawah, I don't know if that was because I wasn't inciting terrorism acts. I wasn't saying we need to blow stuff up here. I was supportive of fights wherever they were taking place, Chechnya, anywhere, right? So there's that. I mean, I can imagine if one of the guys that I was dealing with was an undercover, it's possible that a prosecution could have been started. But I think to answer the question directly, when I went to Syria in 2002, one of the first things I did was I registered with the Canadian Embassy. Because I wanted them to know that I was there to study and that I wasn't up to any nefarious activities. And in fact, later on, that's exactly what the Security Intelligence Service told me, was that the fact that you registered at the embassy, you came in, you talked to the official, that told us this is a guy that's, because everyone else we're looking for, they don't register at the embassy, and it's very hard to track you. right? So I think those were the things that really prevented that for me.
Hi, Jordan Slopey. I work for NATO Special Operations Headquarters. My question is, you said that the government really doesn't have a role in the counter messaging. But my question is, do politicians have a role, or should they have a role? Yes or no? I think you can kind of debate both sides. But we see that as being more inflammatory versus helpful. Is there something specifically, you know, in the area that we are in DC, what advice would you give to politicians to kind of help encourage college-age students to continue those messaging without really having a political label on it? That's multiple questions, but.
Yeah, the politician is quite the beast. I don't know what to do with it. I think, yeah. I was gonna say they should probably have a sense of social responsibility, but I realize that that's not gonna go anywhere. No, so when I say the government has no role, I mean that what these people are doing, it can never be matched, I think, by a government agency. When we're talking about, you know, huge lumbering bureaucracies, they are not agile. They're extremely risk averse. Those are two things that, I mean, you need to have in your counter messaging. That's something that they just can't do by nature of the institution. All right. So the politicians, you know, I always say that if you were really interested in countering ISIS in whatever small way you can do it, don't give them the ammunition that they're looking for. So all this, like, especially the anti-Islamic rhetoric it's crazy. It is just nuts, because it's radicalizing people. And those marginalized, at-risk youth who are being told by the extremists that we're telling don't listen to them, who are being told by the extremists, they hate you. They hate you because of your Islam. Join us. We will celebrate you, your Islam, your identity. Now, what competing product do we have? Does society offer those marginalized and at-risk youth? I think, now, and I don't want to be too negative, because on one hand, I do see a lot of positive stuff that is being done. Inclusion, for example, that's why I said the interfaith approach is very effective. I think it's very effective. It allows people to be their own religion and be proud of it. But stand next to somebody of another religion. Where's Ali? You know, that was great. Where is he? Oh, sorry. That was great. You know, take a selfie with somebody from another religious tradition. So some of those things are being done, but I think these politicians, they're really throwing fuel on the fire. They're making it very difficult for us to do our work. And I don't know how you're going to convince them to, you know, a guy's running for president. I mean, you know, when it comes to power, there's nothing that can stop people. And apparently now he's received even more money because of his anti-Muslim remarks. I mean, he's being rewarded for that, so he's just going to keep going, right?
Let me turn to our, what, are you going to be positive? Remember, we're working on positive messaging. That's the whole point. I'll get back to you, I really will. But let me turn to our Missouri State students a little bit. And I think we made some comments about your great presentation. But how do you sustain it now? And some of you are leaving, you're graduating. You're not going to continue to be together to work on this. Can you reflect a little bit on where you go from here and how I know that, you know, Melissa will be there, but how do you sustain this? Well, I think you give them all A's for today, so. But can you talk a little bit and reflect a little bit about today's discussions as well and what you've learned from it and how it's perhaps affected your views of what you're trying to do?
Well, in terms of continuation, obviously that was our goal, and one of you know, the project's goal in general is how do you sustain a platform, and that was the whole time we were doing research, development, integration. We wanted something that we could hand over to an organization, to a department, and they could take it from there, even if we weren't in the place or employed. Well, thankfully, we are going to be partnering, like we said, with Counter Extremism Project, CEP, with the launch on Monday, and we're going to hopefully have a few members of our team working with them to sustain it. So, you know, knowledge transfer as well as building off of our knowledge that we currently have as well. So that's how we're really going to sustain it. And from there, using the resources that CEP has and all their connections, we'll just, you know, it's going to be great to see kind of what happens as well. I know for our perspective of the issue in general, completely changed because we had access to so much research that, you know, looking, like you were talking about this media today, it's always the violence about it, very negative. People get tired of that. Our peers get tired of that. They couldn't believe we were researching ISIS and terrorism and all these items. Like, why would you want to involve your life in such negative topics that could bring you down? But in reality, it just made us open up our eyes to the world of what we can do and what positive messaging we can make to change the lives of the next generation, of our generation, and the future too. So,
Other questions for them? How has this experience at Missouri State changed your lives? I mean, you're leaving now, you're going into different fields, you're probably not going to do this anymore. But how has this changed your views about things? And I think many of us have children your age and obviously would like to clone most of you, but that's impossible. But you're going on now to different things in your lives and your careers, and this is sort of a way station or a stop along the way. But how has this changed you, your views about life, about the United States, about the world, and where do you go from here?
I think it's definitely ignited like a streak of patriotism in all of us, and that just because we're college students from a smaller university in the Midwest doesn't mean that we can't come up with competitive solutions for global issues like this. And it doesn't mean that we can't make an impact, whether it's within our community, our state, our country, or even beyond to 195 countries. But it kind of like gives you that confidence to say, okay, I can take the microphone in a room with you guys and be proud of what we created. And I think for us, it's something we'll never forget, and today was something we won't forget. So it was a huge learning experience.
And to add on to that, it's been very empowering to know that government officials and people in your guys' caliber are very interested in hearing from us, the young successor generation. That's just very empowering to us, and it's been a life lesson that we'll forever take on and experiences.
I wish our whole team of 15 was here.
Just remember what you said when you get to the artist.
Yeah, then we'll be turning it over to Gen Z.
I'm just curious what all of you intend to do with the rest of your lives. I mean, what's your major in college, and where do you intend to go, all of you, real quickly, so we get a sense of that?
sure. In May, I graduated with my MBA, and so I'm actually working here in DC with Accenture.
And I have my undergrad in advertising and marketing, and I'll be done with my MBA next December. And I am sticking with the 195 campaign and working with CEP to see that through and taking everybody's compliments and considerations and questions in today, and yeah, make you guys proud.
And then I'll be graduating with a marketing degree in advertising and promotion this December. And then I've signed a contract for a year and a half to work as with a nonprofit and travel the United States. And then hopefully after that, get into the ad agency life and marketing.
Any questions here?
Oh, my plans? I still have I'm in the third semester, so I just started studying last year, so I still have some time to go. And I'm going to consult on because there are a few more students coming on to get clipped together in the next semester. And I'm going to consult these people on what we've learned and all the experiences, what they can use, so they don't have to start from scratch.
Any other comments or questions? Yes. Sign up.
So basically, I'm graduating on May with a degree in international relations, and I'm planning to actually coming to DC and get another degree in international humanitarian law. So yeah.
Yes, we want to hear from all of you who joined us today as well. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what you've learned today, and where you go from here.
I did actually have a couple of questions, but
Here's your chance.
I'm Ashwata. I'm an international communications graduate student at American University in DC. I plan to specialize in social media, how we can utilize social media for conflict resolution. So this is kind of like the perfect conference, sort of, for me. I actually did want to ask you about, ask all of you in the room about how you think you can balance. The majority of the fighters in ISIS are not from the Western countries. They're from countries, developing countries in the global South. Do you think US should get involved in counter messaging and targeting those people? And if it should, how do you balance that with the kind of cultural imperialism that tends to happen when US or Western countries do get involved?
Yeah, the State Department actually does that. They put ads in papers, or they have products that they, whether it's in newspapers or websites. A lot of times they use local people, so they understand nuances, cultural issues, whatnot. But what's also happened, and just a quick back to that snapshot of the time period. So after 2014, when this whole caliphate thing happened, a number of institutions were put up, like Hidayah Center in Abu Dhabi. And from that came another center called the Sawab Center, which is relatively new. The State Department is supporting it, but it's completely run locally. And I think that's what you're going to start seeing more of. I think the U.S. understands, the U.S. will continue to promote its interests in the different countries and whatnot, but when it comes to this very specific issue, I think you will find that what's happening is they're encouraging local actors to stand up and do that. And that way you avoid all the baggage that comes with the Great Satan.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned when you were speaking earlier that it was mainly because of the lack of role models as a youth, as a lack of I think Muslim role models that you mentioned. Why do you think people don't turn to the religious leaders in the community, like the imams or other scholars? Like, there are many, but why do you think they don't get the attention from the youth?
So the Muslim world is in crisis. The simple fact is, and I'll say it, when, once upon a time, the Muslim civilization was very great. And the Muslims will always tell you about how we did this and we did that, and it's all great. But as soon as the Muslims left the study of science, philosophy, these things, and stuck only to theology, is when everything went down. So today, what you have is theologians and imams who are, they don't resonate with the youth. They don't speak their language. They're often very judgmental. There's no way a kid is going to go to his imam and say, I have a girlfriend and she's pregnant. No way. The imam is going to accuse him of adultery and tell him the various punishments he could get and that he's definitely going to hell. Maybe there'll be an imam who's softer, but he'll be the exception to the rule. I think there is a huge generational gap between imams and Muslim youth today. In the West and in the East, it's a little different. The gap is still there, but that's one thing, the gap. Number two, you're dealing with theologians who are studying religious books from literally 1,000 years ago, and without any nuance of modern time. So when you go to the imam, all he can do, he's like a parrot. He just regurgitates what he learned from a book that was written 1,000 years ago. So for even, when we talk about in de-radicalization or CVE, can we get the imams involved? Slow down, because who are these imams? What training do they have? If you look at the rabbinical tradition or the Christian clergy, counseling and pastoral care, and that's a part of their curriculum. You don't have that in the Muslim world, in the Muslim scholarly study. You don't have that. So I think there's a serious problem with those imams. There are some imams that do have star power, and there are. I'm not saying that there are none, but I'm saying that there's a gap. There are very few that are really good, and those few, they're really good. So I think I would say is promoting these people more. Like there's a Habib Ali Jifri, for example. Habib Ali Jifri is from Yemen originally. He is a living descendant of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Good looking, perfume, smells nice, always smiling. He's got a great YouTube video on rights of women in Islam. So you know, when we hear about Islam needs a reformation, Islam needs a reformation, you can't get atheists to make that argument for us. It's got to come from inside the community. So when I see a scholar like this speak so nicely, appealing only from the Islamic tradition, that's the way forward. But right now, what we have is this default to imams as if they, you know what I mean, as if they can talk to the young people. That's a huge assumption that we need to get away from. So I think there remains that deficit in the community.
In young people's lives, but I think one of the biggest hurdles would be the West can't tell the East that you guys need to counsel the imams to become more involved in the youth. So how do you think you get around that?
I think we can do that. Yeah, I'm gonna say actually maybe we do need to do that. Maybe we do need to. So for example, the imams that we have in the West, you're in our domain. And this is what we expect of our people in the society, whether you're an imam or just a regular citizen. We expect you to contribute positively to society. Now we have this problem, and it's a problem. I'm not saying it's, you know, it's because of, there's a lot of media attention, of course, and, you know, I mean, I'm trying to balance because statistically speaking, you're in Canada, you're more likely to be killed by a moose than you are by a terrorist, okay? And there's some statistic about, I think it's in the U.S., more people get killed by falling furniture, right, than terrorism. I mean, look at gun deaths, right? Try to have a conversation on gun control of any kind in the U.S. Oh my God, it's crazy. We're from the north, so we're like, whoa. But I would say that considering that, given the fact that there is a problem, we need to leverage as many people as we can. The religious leaders, because a lot of this has to do with religious interpretations, I think it's well within the right of society, Western society, to kind of put to the religious leaders, maybe you should expand your skill set a bit and include counseling or whatever else.
Do you mean religious leaders in the West or religious leaders in the East?
Both. Yep. I think so. What happens is religious leaders in the East sometimes will take cues from what's happening in the West. So they'll see how Western religious Islamic scholars are dealing with the issues there, and then try to and then see how they can apply it into their own particular thing. But I think we obviously need to reach, Islamic scholars who are in the East. And a lot of work is being done. I mean, we don't see it. This is the problem. Many places, even, I know the whole Saudi Arabia thing, I'm also torn on this. I'm a Sufi, right? The Wahhabis don't like us. They consider us deviants and apostates, right? And meanwhile, it's like, I keep telling them, like, where were Wahhabis before the 1800s? They didn't exist. Sufis have been around from day one, but yet, some of the best anti-ISIS stuff right now is coming from Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda. A lot of people, it's horrible because what's happening is they're defecting to Al-Qaeda. Great. Not exactly a measure of success for us, but I'm just saying that they're doing it, right? They're doing, and a lot of that stuff, the verses they used, they're using stuff that's legit Islamic, religious interpretations. Like one of the biggest things that I've been on is the term Khawarij. K-H-A-W-A-R-I-J, okay? K-H-A-W-A-R-I-J. Khawarij is an Islamic term for deviant rebels who emerged in the early Islamic period, who were condemned by the Prophet, peace be upon him, and all the scholars after them. I presented to this effect at the Servant Challenge. The Prophet said, when you find them, kill them. He said they are the dogs of hell, the worst of creation. So, the term, all the material around the Khawarij, it's too complicated. I don't want to get too much into that, but basically what's happening is Al-Qaeda is using legit Islamic interpretations to label ISIS as Khawarij, which is the same thing that moderate scholars, I don't know moderate, but other scholars are doing. The Shia understand that term Khawarij. The Sunnis understand that term Khawarij. So a lot is being done, but we're just not hearing about it. And just back to your point again, I think it really is. We do need to get those religious scholars to expand their skill set.
Can you reflect very briefly? Yes. Ali?
Yeah, when we were talking about the role models for Muslims, do you think that when people who are talking about or who want to come back after they have went to Syria, do you think that it would help to put these people into public to create role models for, because it is going to attract the ISIS or the people on ISIS, and they're going to see it, and probably you can get to some younger people and create role models for them so they can see, okay, there is a way out here and there are people going back, to really like put them into public and do a marketing against ISIS. Do you think that this
Yes.
can work?
So, I mean, notwithstanding my negative comments on returnees, I would really like to see a very strict selection process, number one, okay, to find the right candidates. I wouldn't want to let everyone in. I want to find the right candidates. I want to prep them, okay? So I'll go through the usual. First, you probably should have a forensic interviewer in the room to make sure that they're not lying. Probably have a former extremist, if you have one that's vetted, like me, to be able to, test them on certain questions to see if they're lying or not. Usually if they agree with everything you say, something's wrong. So select them, prep them, and deploy them, redeploy them. And I think it is an extremely effective, I think it will work, assuming that you've done the previous steps correctly. I would put them in the public, absolutely. In fact, some of the one-to-one stuff that I was doing just online, I flipped people online. I turned an ISIS guy into an anti-ISIS guy. If you were to Google the term bullied Finnish, Finnish, like from Finland, bullied Finnish teenager ISIS, it'll bring up a Newsweek article of a kid in Finland, 20-something, white kid, who was one of the most prolific ISIS supporters and tweeters. And I worked on that kid for a year and a half, like almost every day. Okay, like who's got the time to do that, all right? Apparently I don't have a life. I worked on that kid, and eventually, and you know what? He got out, and now he's anti-ISIS. He's not completely de-radicalized. He still has some pretty extreme views, but he's now anti-ISIS. So here's the thing that we might have to deal with. Their religious views may continue to be ultra-conservative, but they are going to have more impact with the at-risk than somebody like me, really, because I got a tie, I'm associated to the Kuffar West, intelligence services, that's the worst. But guys like that, I think, will be very effective. They will need to be put out in public. Also, mainly for the reason that after they become public, they can't go back. They will immediately be, you're a spy. They could never go back to their extremist, unless you see him on video saying, I recant my de-radicalization and here I am atoning by blowing myself up. I mean, that could happen too. So.
Let me ask one more question, and then I'm going to have General Miller terminate our proceedings today and invite all of you to join us for a farewell drink. Mubin, how do you explain this attraction to jihadi brides, as we say, to what I perceive to be a significant amount of young Western women who are flocking to the Middle East to become the brides of jihadi fighters? It's so counterintuitive. I think it's a fascinating kind of phenomenon. Again, what I referred to, in this particular case with ISIS, logic does not always prevail. And how do you explain that, what is apparently a significant attraction of young Western women going to Syria and the Middle East to become brides of jihadis? What is going on from your point of view? And if any of our young ladies have any perceptions, I'd like to hear them too.
So in my presentation that I gave, remember that slide I had, it said, as a Muslim woman, I wanted to get my piece of eye candy. That's what she said. And she talked about how when I'm watching these jihadi videos, these guys looked really hot. Now, I think what it is, the reality is this. Now, one is, when we analyze these things, we must not analyze it from our perspective. This is a basic analytical error, right? You know, Psychology of Intelligence Analysis by Hoyer Jr., it's a CIA publication. Great book. Mirror imaging fallacy, where you try to understand the other from your mindset. So we should not do that. Understand it from their mindset. Okay, so what's their mindset? You're dealing with a kid, teenagers mostly. One, it's a teenager, right? You don't see 20-something-year-olds running to join and meet, you know, an ISIS foreign fighter or whatever. It's usually teenage girls. It's usually teenage girls who are trapped at home. They can't go out, living in a very confined environment. They can't talk to boys. There's a complete, unnatural gender separation that you see in a lot of these conservative Muslim communities. In fact, I would say that you see today the kind of gender separation that you didn't even see in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. It's like gone to another extreme. It's really weird. So what's happening is these girls can't go out. They can't talk to boys, even like just normally, just like without anything, you know. If they do, God knows what could happen to them. I mean, we know the whole concept of, you know, dishonor killings, right? I don't like to call them honor killings, but that's a very real concern for some people. I mean, when you're dealing with some really traditional cultures, I mean, Pakistani, Punjabi culture, I mean, those people are crazy, okay? And I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, they will kill their daughter. They will do that. And the sons will participate in it. It happened in Canada, the Kingston case, right? Where a father and the three daughters and the ex-wife was a second wife, and she was teaching them how to drive, and he's from Afghanistan, and the brother participated in a conspiracy, and they rammed the car from behind, and dumped the car into the canal, and they drowned, right? Only because of a broken piece of tail light that they found out what happened. So the reality is that you're dealing with extreme cultural, you know, like removing them from normal society. So teenage girls who are trapped at home, who can have a meaningful relationship with members of the opposite sex. And the only way they can do that is to talk to their jihadi boyfriend online. And that jihadi boyfriend is saying all the right things, right? Just like any guy says, right? Just like any guy says. This, and you know, and one is they're sold on the ideology. This is very important. They are sold on the ideology. They believe ISIS is legit, that the caliphate is legit of theirs. I keep calling it a caliphate. And they buy into this. They have rejected the West. They want nothing to do with the West. And here's a place that's offering them a place to go and a place to be who they want to be, so they claim. I think it's a simple thing of them trying to get married, right? With somebody that, you know, somebody that will, yeah.
It's an interesting phenomenon. Any comments from our young ladies here? Yes,
Didn't
ma'am.
that jihadi guy line down? Didn't he totally like?
Wait, we got a mic coming, and then we'll have to wrap this up, so.
I'd like to actually offer an alternate explanation for that. I mean, personally, I've never been attracted to jihadi people online, but just for the sake of saying, I think rebellion has always been in existence as a teenager. In the 90s, it used to be girls from conservative families rebelling against their families and joining, I don't know, punk rock groups or getting tattoos or getting piercings, etc. Now they have access to extremists online. They have access to all sorts of people online. So now I think rebellion's just taken another form. I'm not sure if they're sold on the idea of an Islamic caliphate or if they're sold on the ideology of ISIS, because I'm not sure if that's the case, but I feel like it's more their need for rebellion plus the brainwashing that they do go through online through via these extremists that kind of contribute to their travel.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Sorry, I know you want to wrap up, but Ashfata's point sort of speaks to what I was thinking as well, in that, you know, we've talked a lot today about the power of positive peer pressure and the things that that can do for young people, but I'd like to turn that on its head and think about negative peer pressure. If you think about these people who are at risk, they feel like they are not part of their community, they've been shunted to the side. You turn on the TV and you have politicians saying that there's something wrong with them. They go to school and someone thinks that they must be a terrorist because they're Muslim. And this can even be extrapolated to people who have nothing to do with religion. I mean, many of our domestic homegrown terrorists who do things here were also shunned and outsiders, like the Columbine shooters. And maybe this is sort of a given and I wasn't aware, but I think that there are a lot of indirect ways to really help people like this while also combating foreign fighters, in the sense that inclusion and giving people alternatives to when they're feeling alone, so that they don't turn to extremist groups who are looking to punish the very people who are punishing them. That can do a lot for young people in general, and intercultural understanding and making sure that everybody understands that it's okay to be different can do a lot.
Yeah, if you imagine telling a kid, you're nothing, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're gonna amount to nothing, day in and day out, that kid's gonna get screwed up. And I totally take your point. Muslim kids, they're hearing this all the time. You know, you must be terrorists, we don't like you, we don't like your religion, this and that. What else are they gonna take from that? And just a quick point on, remember something about ISIS that you didn't find with these other groups. ISIS opened the door to everybody. Al-Qaeda was very selective, very elitist. You couldn't just walk across the border and join Al-Qaeda. You needed to be vetted very, very, severely. And I think the difference with ISIS is that it did open the door to everyone, and that's why these girls, that's why they're going to ISIS. Al-Qaeda's not going to take them. But I think now, there's this whole other issue of the female foreign fighters now, them returning back, and what are we going to do with them? And it's really, really tragic what's happened to a lot of these girls. I've been following the cases of some of them, and a lot of those girls now, they want to go home. They cry for their parents, and they're not allowed to leave. And some have tried to leave, and they've been shot in the back of the head. And I've seen the tweets, like, a whole bunch of them have been killed. So,
let us finish with General Miller.
Thank you. I'm good. I got 3 mics right now. Mubin, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
And, sir, if you care to make some final comments.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks. Hey, it's been an extremely productive day. My eyes have been really opened up. We started off with a great brief from Peter, and then Tony with his Ed adventure. Yeah, I get it. All right. And the ladies that worked with Tony, as well as Ali, I really appreciate what y'all have provided us today. It's opened our eyes. And for one of those comments about, you really thank us for listening, don't forget that when you're 58 years old, okay? Listen, because it's really gotten me thinking in a different direction than where I was before. Brian, where are you at? Are you already headed back to... Thanks a lot, buddy. I appreciate what you're doing for us, not just here, but also with SOCOM and the work that the CT effort has been providing. And finally, Mubin, that town hall presentation was extremely beneficial. So I appreciate that. And to all of the attachés, don't forget the 5th through the 8th, right, Liam? In Philadelphia is going to be our next big one, so of April. So we really appreciate y'all being there with us. And with that, please join us at the NoHo Social.